President Trump's problems in the Jeffrey Epstein case continue. This week, a judge rebuked what looked like a ploy by the Trump administration to take some of the documents to court when they could release most of them, denying that request, calling it a distraction. Key officials are also going under oath this week, including the Trump attorney general who was in charge when Epstein died, and there were so many questions about the missing videos and secrecy. That's Attorney General Barr. Now, we have been following this story, breaking down not only the corruption, but how far back it goes. This is a new timeline that we debuted this week, and I want to show you part of this special report. Local police in Palm Beach, Florida, began a probe into Epstein, investigating reports of abusing victims as young as 14. The local case led to Epstein's indictment for a single count of soliciting prostitution. Epstein reached a deal with the Bush administration's federal prosecutors to take that local Florida conviction for soliciting prostitution with an adult and a minor. Epstein got a lenient, short prison sentence and an unusual agreement that the Bush DOJ would not prosecute Epstein further, or 4 of his co-conspirators, or any others. Another 9 years went by, and then the Miami Herald reported an Epstein expose on the allegations of his conduct and that Bush-era prosecutor who cut the sweetheart deal. That investigative report gained traction, partly because of a tie to Trump, who promoted the very prosecutor, Alex Acosta, to his cabinet, leading to a fairly swift federal indictment of Epstein on far more serious sex trafficking charges. Epstein was found dead in his cell. The situation was suspicious. Officials there broke several protocols. Epstein was a high-profile detainee. He'd been placed on suicide watch, which was then quickly lifted. Guards failed to do required inspections the very night of his death. And a lot of questions were hanging over all of this. Trump Attorney General Barr even admitting the prison made mistakes then, but claiming that he personally reviewed prison video which showed no one entering the cell. And with Epstein dead, prosecutors turned to a co-conspirator who might have benefited from that original Florida case being shut down, what I told you about. They went ahead and indicted Ghislaine Maxwell for helping Epstein's sex trafficking. It was a problem for Trump, given that he promoted the original prosecutor, that he oversaw the DOJ, which failed to answer questions or have transparency about whatever happened in that prison cell. Bondi went from saying there was a client list to there wasn't. She was lying then or lying now. The DOJ memo then said there was no other Epstein info that was going to be released, which ignited that firestorm of criticism we all lived through. The Trump administration's contradicting claims drew more heat on its secrecy. The DOJ then sent this former Trump criminal defense attorney to interview Maxwell in prison and then transferred her to a better prison, an apparent reward for the one person doing any time for Epstein's indicted federal crimes. This is a damning account of President Trump's approach to this case in government. Now, this is a serious governing problem for President Trump and the DOJ and obviously the impacted victims. Even if we learn nothing else about this, it's an open scandal for this administration. And then there are the glaring and inconvenient facts that go back even further before Trump was in government. Legally, these social links alone are not evidence of a crime. They are evidence of a conflict of interest, the kind of link that requires a judge or prosecutor to recuse from a case. But Trump has been doing the opposite, commenting and intervening. His DOJ's actions on Epstein repeatedly putting secrecy over facts. Secrecy over facts, and a lot of a cover-up over the victims who, as you see in that fuller timeline, were cut out of the initial deal struck by the prosecutor, later promoted and then ousted by the Trump administration. And so many of these victims say they feel cut out again as Maxwell gets special treatment. We're joined by New York Times columnist Michelle Goldberg, an MSNBC analyst. Michelle, it is actually easy to lose some of the thread or the facts on this sordid story. We looked at the timeline both because it shows some of the fundamental problems of corruption, secrecy, putting victims last, which predates Trump, but then either total willful blindness or worse in how Trump has promoted, involved himself with those past deals, and then acted to help an Epstein conspirator when it's all said and done?
Well, I think that helping the Epstein conspirator is really the most shocking and sort of openly scandalous part of this story right now. I mean, it's astonishing, even in a world in which it's hard to be continually astonished by what this administration does. But that he, for some reason, that his administration decided to grant this incredible favor to Ghislaine Maxwell, to transfer her to, and I'm not against, in general, I believe in mercy for people who've committed crimes, but there is no kind of normal explanation for transferring an incarcerated sex offender, an incarcerated sex trafficker, to a minimum security prison. Like, that is actually against regulations. So you had to give her some kind of special deal. And there hasn't been a single word of explanation about why this happened.
Right. They don't even pretend to have a cover story. And that leaves open the question of whether someone who was first and foremost a Donald Trump defender, his criminal defense attorney, who then was rewarded with an unusually high position in the DOJ, in the Clinton era, they were very much thrashed and attacked for far less than that as supposed conflict. So this defense person, a kind of a fixer, is there perhaps looking after Donald Trump's interests, and then the Epstein conspirator is rewarded. So when you draw the timeline out, it gets sort of worse and worse. And I don't think we're done based on what the activities this week, new documents potentially tomorrow.
Well, new documents potentially tomorrow, a judge this week being very, very clear and explicit that not only was the attempt at kind of getting these grand jury documents released, not only was that a diversion in the judge's words, but that there's being very clear that there's, 100,000 documents that the administration could release if it so chooses. Now, Labor Day is coming up. People are going to go on vacation. But as soon as, sort of the world returns to work after Labor Day, or at least Washington returns to work after Labor Day, you're going to have this big press conference in Washington, D.C. with Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie, a Democrat and a Republican, bringing a bunch of Epstein's victims, some of whom they've said haven't spoken publicly before, to tell their stories, and it sounds like kind of express their unhappiness, because some of them now also have demanded more transparency from this administration, which ironically, the administration claims that its lack of transparency is to kind of protect these victims.